Hey there! Tonight we'll talk about the entire lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. If this kind of tale helps you rest, feel free to like the video, but only if it brings you some peace, and I'd love to know in the comments where you're listening from. It's a real comfort to know who else is out there settling in. This is the complete timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's, told from beginning to end. From the first spark of an idea in the minds of two business partners to the sprawling mega complex where the past refuses to stay buried. Close your eyes, let the story wash over you, and drift into the dark history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Our story begins not with Freddy Fazbear, but with Fredbear, a golden bear who would become the foundation of everything that followed. In the late 1970s or early 1980s, the exact date lost to time and deliberate obscurity, us two men shared a dream. Henry, Emily and William Afton were friends, business partners and visionaries who saw the potential in combining family dining with animatronic entertainment. Together they opened Fredbear's Family Diner, a small establishment that would plant the seeds for an empire and a nightmare that would span generations. The diner was modest, intimate, featuring just two animatronic performers. Fredbear, the golden bear with a purple hat and bow tie, served as the main attraction, the friendly face that would greet families and make children smile. Alongside him was Spring Bonnie, a yellow rabbit with a similar design, providing companionship and variety to the performances. These weren't ordinary animatronics though. Henry and William had developed something innovative, something that would prove both revolutionary and catastrophically dangerous: spring lock technology. The performances at Fredbear's Family Diner were magical in those early days. Children would gather around the stage, their faces lit with wonder, as Fredbear and Spring Bonnie sang songs and told stories. The animatronics moved with a fluidity that was remarkable for the era, their gestures and expressions carefully programmed to seem almost alive. Henry Emily had poured his heart into the designs, studying child psychology and entertainment theory to create characters that would resonate with young audiences. Fredbear was designed to be a father figure, warm and protective, with a deep voice that conveyed authority and kindness. Spring Bonnie was more playful, energetic, designed to encourage children to dance and participate in the shows. The restaurant itself was decorated in warm colours, with balloons and streamers creating a festive atmosphere. The menu featured simple fare, pizza, and the hot dog, soda, but the food was secondary to the experience. Parents brought their children to Fredbear's not just to eat, but to create memories, to celebrate birthdays and special occasions, to give their kids an experience they would remember for years. And for a time, it worked. Fredbear's Family Diner was beloved, a cornerstone of the community, a place where families felt safe and welcome. William Afton, in those early days, seemed like a devoted partner in the business. He would work long hours perfecting the animatronic systems, troubleshooting mechanical issues, ensuring that Fredbear and Spring Bonnie performed flawlessly. He had a technical brilliance that complemented Henry's creative vision. Where Henry dreamed of what the characters could be, William figured out how to make those dreams reality. He understood circuits and servos, programming and hydraulics. He could take Henry's sketches and turn them into functioning machines that moved and spoke and entertained. But even then there were signs of something darker in William's character. He was distant with his own children, more interested in his machines than in his family. He would spend nights in his workshop conducting experiments that he never fully explained to Henry. He had a coldness in his eyes when he looked at the animatronics, a clinical detachment that suggested he saw them as more than just entertainment devices. Henry, focused on the creative and business aspects of the diner, didn't notice these warning signs. He trusted his partner, believed in their shared vision, and had no reason to suspect that William Afton was capable of the horrors that would come. Spring lock suits were marvels of engineering, designed to serve dual purposes. They could function as autonomous animatronics, indeed performing on stage without human intervention, entertaining children with pre-programmed movements and songs. But they could also be worn by employees, the animatronic components compressed by a series of spring-loaded mechanisms that would create space for a human body inside. An employee could use a hand crank to wind back the springs, climb into the suit, and perform as the character, bringing a level of interactivity and spontaneity that pure animatronics couldn't match. The process of wearing a spring lock suit was complex and required careful training. Employees had to follow strict protocols, keeping the suit dry, avoiding sudden movements, ensuring all the locks were properly wound before climbing inside. The suits were heavy, uncomfortable, and claustrophobic. The person inside had limited visibility through the character's eyes, had to breathe carefully to avoid triggering the moisture-sensitive locks. Weg had to move slowly and deliberately to prevent the springs from releasing. It was exhausting work, requiring both physical stamina and constant vigilance. But for the employees who mastered the technique, there was something magical about becoming the character, about seeing children's faces light up when Fredbear or Spring Bonnie interacted with them directly, about being able to improvise and respond to the audience in ways that programmed animatronics never could. Henry Emily often wore the Fredbear suit himself, especially during special events and birthday parties. He loved the direct connection with the children, loved being able to make them laugh and smile, loved seeing the joy that Fredbear brought to their lives. He was good at it, natural and comfortable in the role, able to project warmth and friendliness even through the mechanical suit. William Afton, by contrast, rarely wore the suits. He preferred to work behind the scenes, maintaining the technology, observing the performances, studying how the children reacted to the characters. When he did wear the Spring Bonnie suit, there was something slightly off about his performance, a stiffness that suggested he was going through the motions rather than truly connecting with the audience. The technology was brilliant in concept but fundamentally flawed in execution. The spring locks were delicate, sensitive to moisture and sudden movement. If the locks failed while someone was wearing the suit, the springs would snap back into place with tremendous force, driving the animatronic components into the person's body. Metal rods would pierce flesh, gears would crush bone. The victim would be impaled from the inside by dozens of mechanisms designed to hold the suit's structure. Death would be slow, agonizing, inevitable. The victim would feel every spring snap into place, every rod pierce their body, every gear crush their bones. They would be unable to scream, the mechanisms filling their mouth and throat unable to escape, trapped inside the suit as it killed them from the inside. It would take minutes for death to come, minutes of unimaginable agony as the suit transformed from costume to coffin. There were warnings, of course, small incidents that should have served as red flags. An employee who got caught in a partial spring lock failure and suffered severe lacerations to their arm. Another who experienced a minor lock release that bruised their ribs but didn't cause serious injury. These incidents were documented, investigated, resulted in additional safety protocols and training requirements. But the fundamental danger of the spring lock suits was never fully addressed. The technology was too valuable, too central to the business model, too impressive to abandon. So the suits continued to be used, the employees continued to wear them, and the risk continued to grow with every performance, every birthday party, every moment that someone climbed inside a spring lock suit and trusted that the mechanisms would hold. The spring lock suits were accidents waiting to happen, but in those early days at Fredbear's family diner, before the tragedies, before anyone understood the true cost of this innovation, they were simply a clever way to bring joy to children. They were the foundation of the business, the technology that set Fredbear's apart from other family restaurants, the innovation that would eventually lead to expansion and success. And they were, unknowingly, the instruments that would facilitate some of the darkest moments in the FNAF timeline, the tools that would be used for murder, and would themselves become the means of William Afton's eventual downfall. Fredbear's family diner thrived. Children loved the golden bear and the yellow rabbit. Families gathered for meals and celebrations. The community embraced the restaurant as a wholesome, family-friendly establishment. Henry Emily was the creative force, the designer who gave the characters their appeal, who understood what would make children smile. William Afton was the technical mind, the engineer who made the animatronics work, who solved the mechanical challenges that brought Henry's visions to life. Together they built something that should have been wonderful. But William Afton was not the man he appeared to be. Beneath the surface of his partnership with Henry, beneath his role as businessman and father, something dark festered. William Afton was fascinated by death, not in the philosophical sense of contemplating mortality, but in the mechanical, experimental sense of understanding how consciousness persisted beyond the body. He looked at the animatronics he and Henry created and saw not entertainment, but possibility. He saw vessels. He saw the potential for something that had eluded humanity since the dawn of consciousness: immortality. William's obsession with death and consciousness likely predated Fredbear's family diner, rooted in experiences and traumas from his past that remain unknown. Perhaps he'd lost someone important and couldn't accept their death. Perhaps he had always been fascinated by the boundary between life and death, by the question of what happens to consciousness when the body fails. Whatever the origin of his obsession, it grew stronger as he worked with the animatronics, as he saw how lifelike they could appear, how children would interact with them as if they were real beings rather than machines. If a machine could seem alive, William reasoned, then perhaps a machine could contain life. If consciousness was simply electrical impulses and chemical reactions, then perhaps those impulses could be transferred, preserved, made immortal in a vessel that would never decay. These thoughts consumed William in his private hours. He would sit in his workshop late at night, surrounded by animatronic parts and circuit boards, sketching designs for experiments that he never shared with Henry. He began to study biology alongside engineering, trying to understand the physical basis of consciousness, trying to identify what made a person, rather than just a collection of cells and electrical signals. He read about near-death experiences, about people who claimed to have left their bodies and returned. He studied religious and philosophical texts about the soul, trying to find some common thread, some hint about the nature of consciousness that he could exploit for his experiments. William's family suffered from his obsession. His wife, whose name and fate remain mysterious in the FNAF timeline, was increasingly isolated and unhappy. William barely acknowledged her existence, spending all his time either at the restaurant or in his workshop. His children grew up with a father who was physically present but emotionally absent, who looked at them with a clinical detachment that suggested he saw them as specimens rather than as his own flesh and blood. Michael, the oldest, acted out through bullying and cruelty, desperate for any attention from his father, even negative attention. Elizabeth sought her father's approval by showing interest in his work, by asking questions about the animatronics, by trying to understand what consumed so much of his time and energy. And the crying child, the youngest and most sensitive, seemed to sense that something was wrong with his father, seemed to understand on some instinctive level that William Afton was not a safe person to be around. The first tragedy struck Henry's family directly, though the exact circumstances remain shrouded in mystery and conflicting accounts. Charlotte Emily, Henry's daughter, was murdered outside one of the early restaurant locations. The details are fragmented, deliberately obscured by time and the unreliable nature of the evidence. But what is certain is that Charlotte died alone, locked outside in the rain, unable to reach safety. The security puppet, an animatronic designed to protect children and give gifts, was trapped in its box by other children who had locked it inside as a prank. When Charlotte needed protection most, when she cried in the alley behind the restaurant, the puppet struggled to reach her but arrived too late. By the time it broke free and found her, Charlotte was dead, her small body lying in the rain. Charlotte had been at the restaurant for a birthday party, surrounded by other children, safe within the walls of the establishment her father had built. But something happened. An argument with other children, a moment of exclusion, a cruel prank that left her locked outside. The other children didn't mean for anything bad to happen. They were just being children, thoughtless and careless, not understanding the consequences of their actions. They locked the puppet in its box because they thought it was funny, because they wanted to see what would happen, because children don't always think about how their pranks might affect others, and they left Charlotte outside because she was different, because she didn't fit in, i.e. because children can be cruel without even realizing it. Charlotte stood in the alley crying, pounding on the door, begging to be let back inside. The rain soaked through her clothes, cold and miserable. She could hear the sounds of the party continuing inside, the laughter and music, the joy that she was excluded from. She didn't understand why the other children had been so mean to her. She just wanted to go back inside, to be warm and safe, to find her father and tell him what had happened. But the door remained locked, and no one heard her cries over the noise of the party. The puppet, inside its box, struggled against the lock that held it closed. Its programming drove it to protect children, to respond to their distress, to give gifts and comfort. It could sense Charlotte's fear and sadness, could detect that a child was in danger, but it couldn't break free. The lock was simple, just a latch that the children had fastened. But the puppet's mechanisms weren't designed to overcome physical barriers. It pushed and strained, its programming creating something like desperation, something like panic, as it tried to reach the child who needed help. Finally, the lock gave way. The puppet burst from its box and moved toward the door, toward the alley where Charlotte was crying, but it was too late. By the time the puppet reached her, Charlotte had stopped crying. She lay in the rain, her small body still, her eyes closed. The puppet approached her, its programming unable to process what had happened, unable to understand that the child it was meant to protect was beyond help. It draped itself over Charlotte's body, as if trying to warm her, as if trying to comfort her, as if trying to fulfill its purpose even though it had failed. But something impossible happened in that alley. Something that would define the supernatural rules of the FNAF universe. The puppet, driven by its programming to protect children, to give gifts and life, somehow became a vessel for Charlotte's dying consciousness. Whether through some property of the animatronic technology, through the sheer force of a child's dying consciousness, or through something beyond human understanding, Charlotte's soul became bound to the puppet. She did not pass on. She remained, trapped in the mechanical body, unable to speak, unable to cry, able only to watch through the puppet's hollow eyes and black tears. She was aware, conscious, but imprisoned in a body that was not her own, unable to communicate, unable to find peace, unable to do anything but exist in this strange half-life between death and consciousness. William Afton witnessed what happened to Charlotte, or at least discovered the truth shortly after. He saw the impossible, a dead child's soul inhabiting an animatronic. And in that moment of horror that should have broken any normal person, as that should have made him question everything he thought he knew about life and death, William Afton found his life's work. If a soul could inhabit an animatronic, then death was not the end. If consciousness could be preserved in metal and circuitry, then William Afton could achieve what no human had ever achieved. He could conquer death itself. But he needed to understand the process. He needed to experiment. He needed more subjects. The Afton family seemed normal from the outside. Gassus, a typical household with 3 children and 2 parents. William had a wife whose name and fate remain mysterious, lost to the gaps in the timeline. He had 3 children who had all become central to the tragedy that unfolded. Michael was the oldest, a teenager who dealt with his father's emotional distance by becoming a bully, channeling his pain and confusion into cruelty toward his younger siblings. Elizabeth was the daughter, curious and fascinated by her father's work, withdrawn to the animatronics he created. And then there was the youngest son, a boy whose name has been lost or deliberately withheld, known only as the Crying Child. The Crying Child was terrified of the animatronics. While other children laughed and played at Fredbear's Family Diner and the newer Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations, he cowered and wept. He had nightmares about them, visions of the animatronics coming to life in twisted, monstrous forms with sharp teeth and dead eyes. Or whether he had seen something he shouldn't have, whether he had witnessed his father's experiments, or whether he simply possessed a child's intuition that something was deeply wrong, we cannot know. But his fear was profound and constant, a terror that consumed his young life and made every visit to the restaurants a nightmare. The Crying Child's nightmares were vivid and terrifying. He would wake up screaming, describing animatronics with rows of sharp teeth, with claws that reached for him, with eyes that followed him wherever he went. His bedroom was filled with plush toys of the Freddy Fazbear characters, gifts that were meant to comfort him, but instead became sources of terror. He would stare at them in the darkness, convinced they were watching him, convinced they were waiting for him to fall asleep so they could come alive and hurt him. His parents tried to reassure him that the animatronics were just machines, just entertainment, nothing to be afraid of. But the Crying Child knew better. He could sense the wrongness, could feel in his bones that the animatronics were dangerous, that something terrible was going to happen. His fear manifested in physical symptoms. He would have panic attacks when taken to the restaurants, hyperventilating and crying, his small body shaking with terror. He would refuse to eat, would hide under tables, would beg to go home. Other children would stare at him, confused by his reaction. and unable to understand why he was so scared of the friendly animatronics that they loved. Parents would whisper about him, wondering what was wrong with the Afton boy, why he couldn't just enjoy the show like normal children. And William Afton would watch his son's terror with cold detachment, perhaps curious about what the child sensed, perhaps annoyed that his son was drawing attention, perhaps simply indifferent to the suffering of his own child. The crying child had one comfort in his life, a golden Fredbear plush toy that he carried everywhere. The plush seemed to talk to him, offering reassurance and comfort, telling him tomorrow is another day and I will put you back together. Whether the plush actually spoke or whether the crying child was imagining the voice in his desperate need for comfort remains ambiguous in the lore. But the plush was his constant companion, his only friend in a world that seemed determined to terrify him. He would clutch it tightly when the nightmares came, would whisper to it when he was scared, would believe its promises that everything would be okay, even when nothing felt okay. Michael Afton did not understand or respect his younger brother's fear. He was a teenager, cruel in the way that teenagers can be, more interested in impressing his friends than in protecting his vulnerable younger sibling. Michael and his friends wore masks of the animatronic characters, Foxy, Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy, and would torment the crying child relentlessly. They would jump out to scare him, chase him through the house, make his life a constant state of anxiety and dread. The crying child would beg them to stop, would cry and plead, but Michael and his friends thought it was funny, thought they were just toughening him up, thought there was no real harm in their pranks. Michael's cruelty came from his own pain and confusion. His father ignored him, showed no interest in his life or achievements, seemed to care more about his machines than about his own son. His mother was absent, either physically or emotionally, unable or unwilling to provide the stability and love that Michael needed. Michael was angry, hurt, desperate for attention and validation, and he took out his pain on the easiest target, his younger brother, who was weak and scared and couldn't fight back. Michael told himself that he was helping, is that scaring his brother would make him braver, that the crying child needed to grow up and stop being such a baby. But deep down, Michael knew he was being cruel. He knew his brother was genuinely terrified. He just didn't care enough to stop. The friends who helped Michael torment the crying child were typical teenagers, thoughtless and careless, following Michael's lead without considering the consequences. They wore the masks because it was fun, because it got a reaction, because they enjoyed the power of making someone scared. They didn't think about the psychological damage they were causing, didn't consider that their pranks might have lasting effects, didn't understand that fear can be traumatic, especially for a young child. They were just kids being kids, but their thoughtless cruelty would contribute to a tragedy that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In 1983, the crying child's birthday party was held at Fredbear's family diner. He didn't want to be there. He had begged not to go, had cried and pleaded with his family to celebrate anywhere else, but his protests were ignored. The party was planned, the guests were invited, and the crying child had no choice but to attend his own birthday celebration at the place he feared most. Throughout the day, Michael and his friends continued their torment, wearing their masks, chasing him, making him cry. The crying child spent his birthday in tears, terrified, wanting nothing more than to go home. The party was crowded with children and parents, the restaurant filled with the sounds of celebration and entertainment. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie performed on stage, their movements cheerful and inviting, designed to bring joy to the birthday boy. But the crying child couldn't watch the performance. He hid in corners, clutched his Fredbear plush, Omar cried quietly while other children laughed and played. His father was somewhere in the restaurant, busy with business matters, not paying attention to his son's distress. His mother, if she was there at all, was unable or unwilling to intervene, to take her son away from the place that terrified him, to stand up to William and insist that the party be moved elsewhere. Michael and his friends watched the crying child's terror with a mixture of amusement and frustration. They had been tormenting him all day, and he still hadn't gotten over his fear. They decided to take the prank to the next level, to do something that would finally force the crying child to face his fear and realize there was nothing to be afraid of. They didn't think about the consequences. They didn't consider that what they were about to do was dangerous. They just wanted to see the look on the crying child's face, wanted to prove that the animatronics were harmless, wanted to make him stop being such a baby. And then Michael decided to take the prank too far. He and his friends grabbed the crying child, lifted him up despite his screams and struggles, and carried him toward the stage where Fredbear was performing. The crying child begged them to stop, cried out that he didn't want to go, pleaded with his brother to put him down. But Michael and his friends were laughing, thought it was hilarious, mere thought they were just giving the kid a little scare to help him get over his irrational fear. They lifted the crying child up to Fredbear's face, pushed his head toward the animatronic's mouth, told him to give Fredbear a kiss. The crying child's head was placed inside Fredbear's mouth, and then the jaws closed. Whether by accident, by some malfunction of the animatronic systems, or by the activation of the spring lock mechanisms, Fredbear's jaws clamped down on the crying child's head with tremendous force. There was a sickening crunch, the sound of bone breaking, the screams of children and adults alike as they realized what had just happened. Blood pooled on the floor. The party transformed into a nightmare in an instant. Michael stood frozen, his brother's body limp in his arms, realizing too late what he had done, understanding in that horrible moment that his cruelty had killed his own brother. The immediate aftermath of the bite of 83 was chaos. Parents grabbed their children and rushed for the exits, desperate to get away from the horror they had just witnessed. Staff members called for emergency services, tried to provide first aid, tried to do something, anything to help the dying child. Fredbear stood on stage, his jaws still stained with blood, his cheerful appearance now a grotesque mockery of the tragedy that had just occurred. And Michael stood in the centre of it all, holding his brother's body, unable to process what had happened, unable to accept that his prank had resulted in this, unable to do anything but stand there in shock and horror. The crying child was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. His skull had been crushed, his brain severely injured. He lingered for days unconscious, while his family waited and hoped. In those final days, someone, possibly William Afton, possibly someone else, spoke to the dying child, promising, "I will put you back together." But despite this promise, despite whatever efforts were made to save him, the crying child died from his injuries. The bite of 83, as it would come to be known, claimed its victim. The death of the crying child destroyed what remained of the Afton family. Michael was consumed by guilt, unable to eat or sleep, replaying the moment over and over in his mind, wishing he could go back and change what he had done. His friends abandoned him, unable to face their own complicity in the tragedy, unable to look at Michael without remembering what had happened. William Afton became even more distant and obsessed, spending all his time in his workshop conducting experiments that he never explained. And the crying child's mother, if she had been present at all, disappeared from the narrative entirely, her fate unknown, i.e. possibly unable to survive the loss of her youngest child. The consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Fredbear's family diner was closed. The spring-lock suits were deemed too dangerous for continued use and were retired from public performance, relegated to back rooms and storage areas. The entire concept of wearable animatronic suits was abandoned. The incident cast a shadow over Fazbear Entertainment that would never fully lift, and the crying child, either the innocent boy who'd been terrified of the animatronics and had died because of them, may have become something more than just a victim. Some believe his soul was bound to an animatronic, possibly Golden Freddy, possibly something else, fulfilling William Afton's promise to put him back together in the most twisted way imaginable. Michael Afton was destroyed by what he had done. The guilt of killing his own brother, even accidentally, even as a prank gone horribly wrong, would haunt him for the rest of his life and beyond. His father became even more distant, more obsessed with his work, barely acknowledging Michael's existence. The Afton family was fracturing, torn apart by tragedy, and William's growing obsession with understanding death and consciousness. But William Afton did not stop his experiments. If anything, his son's death accelerated his obsession. He had seen death up close now. He had lost a child, and he became more determined than ever to conquer mortality itself, to prove that death could be overcome, that consciousness could persist beyond the destruction of the body. He had seen Charlotte Emily's soul inhabit the puppet. He believed his son's soul might have been bound to an animatronic. The evidence was mounting that his theories were correct. He just needed more data, more subjects, more experiments. Fredbear's family diner closed, but the brand expanded. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened, featuring new animatronics that didn't require the dangerous spring lock technology. Freddy Fazbear, a brown bear with a black top hat and bow tie, became the new mascot. He was joined by Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate Fox. These were the classic animatronics, the iconic quartet that would define the franchise. They were safer, more reliable, designed to entertain without the risk of the spring lock suits. Henry Emily tried to move forward, to create something good from the tragedy, to honour his daughter's memory by bringing joy to other children. But William Afton had other plans. In 1985, William Afton committed the crime that would define the entire FNAF timeline and create the haunted animatronics that would terrorise night guards for decades to come. This was the missing children incident, a tragedy that would destroy 5 families and create 5 vengeful spirits. William retrieved one of the old spring lock suits from storage, the Spring Bonnie costume, the yellow rabbit that had performed alongside Fredbear at the original diner. He put on the suit, using it as a disguise, and entered Freddy Fazbear's Pizza during operating hours. The day of the missing children incident started like any other day at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The restaurant was crowded with families, children running between tables, the sounds of laughter and arcade games filling the air. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica and Foxy performed on stage, their movements smooth and entertaining, their songs familiar and comforting. Parents sat at tables, eating pizza and watching their children play, feeling safe in the family-friendly environment. The staff moved through the restaurant, taking orders, cleaning tables, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. It seemed like a normal, happy day. William Afton arrived wearing the spring Bonnie suit. He's moving through the restaurant as if he belonged there. To the staff, he appeared to be an employee in costume, perhaps hired for a special event or birthday party. To the children, he was Spring Bonnie, the friendly yellow rabbit they'd seen in pictures and advertisements, a character associated with fun and entertainment. No one questioned his presence. No one thought to ask why Spring Bonnie was there, why an old character from Fredbear's Family Diner was appearing at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The suit was his disguise, his way of moving through the restaurant without raising suspicion, his tool for gaining the trust of children who'd been taught to trust animatronic characters. Children trusted the Spring Bonnie character. They had seen him perform, had associated him with fun and entertainment. When a man in a Spring Bonnie suit beckoned to them, told them he had something special to show them, told them to follow him to the back room, they didn't hesitate. Hey, they thought it was part of the show, thought they were getting a special experience that the other children wouldn't get to see. 5 children followed Spring Bonnie into the back room. Their names were Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Cassidy. They were excited, curious, trusting. Gabriel was a confident boy, the kind of child who always wanted to be first, who always wanted to see what was happening. When Spring Bonnie beckoned, Gabriel was the first to follow, eager to see what special surprise awaited. Jeremy was quieter, more cautious, but he followed because Gabriel was going, because he didn't want to be left out, because he trusted that if Gabriel thought it was safe, then it must be safe. Susie loved the animatronics, especially Chica, and she followed Spring Bonnie because she thought she might get to see how the animatronics worked, might get to go backstage and see the magic behind the performances. Fritz was adventurous. He was always looking for excitement, and the promise of something special was too tempting to resist. And Cassidy, the youngest of the 5, followed because the others were going, because she didn't want to be alone, because Spring Bonnie seemed friendly and safe. William Afton murdered all 5 children in that back room. The details of how he killed them are mercifully left vague in the lore, but the aftermath is clear and horrifying. 5 children went missing from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The 5 families were destroyed, left to wonder what happened to their sons and daughters, left to search and hope and eventually grieve. The police investigated, but William Afton was never charged. He was too careful, too clever, possibly too well connected. The bodies were never found by authorities because William had hidden them in the only place no one would think to look, inside the animatronics themselves. The investigation into the missing children incident was extensive but ultimately fruitless. Police interviewed staff members, reviewed security footage, searched the restaurant and surrounding areas. But the security cameras had blind spots, the back rooms weren't monitored, and William Afton had planned carefully. He had timed his attack for a moment when the restaurant was crowded and chaotic, when 5 children could disappear without anyone noticing immediately. Well, by the time parents realised their children were missing, by the time the alarm was raised and the search began, William had already hidden the bodies and removed the Spring Bonnie suit. He was questioned as a co-owner of the establishment, but he had an alibi, had witnesses who could place him elsewhere, had covered his tracks with the precision of someone who had planned every detail. The families of the missing children were devastated. Then Gabriel's parents couldn't understand how their confident, careful son could have disappeared. Jeremy's family blamed themselves for not watching him more closely, for letting him wander away from their table. Susie's mother was haunted by the last conversation she'd had with her daughter, the casual, "I'll be right back," that turned out to be the last word she would ever hear from her child. Fritz's father became obsessed with finding his son, spending years following leads and theories, never accepting that his adventurous boy was gone, and Cassidy's family was destroyed by grief, unable to function, unable to move on, unable to accept that their youngest child had vanished without a trace. He stuffed the children's bodies into the Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy and Golden Freddy suits. The animatronics began to smell of decay and bodily fluids. Parents complained about the stench and the mucus and blood leaking from the animatronics' eyes and mouths. The restaurant tried to clean them, tried to explain it away as mechanical malfunctions, but the smell of death cannot be hidden forever. The location became known for its horrible odour, and business began to decline. But the true horror was not the smell or the leaking fluids. The true horror was what happened to the children's souls. The process of stuffing the bodies into the animatronic suits was brutal and methodical. William Afton had to disassemble parts of the animatronics to create space for the bodies, had to position the children's remains in ways that wouldn't be immediately visible, had to ensure that the suits could still function despite containing human remains. It was gruesome work, the kind of task that would have broken a normal person, but William Afton approached it with clinical detachment, viewing it as a necessary step in his experiments. He was curious about what would happen, about whether the children's souls would bind to the animatronics as Charlotte's had bound to the puppet, about whether he could observe and study the process of consciousness transferring from flesh to metal. Just as Charlotte Emily's soul had inhabited the puppet, the 5 murdered children found themselves trapped in the animatronics that had become their tombs. They could not speak. They could not cry for help. They could only move the mechanical bodies they now inhabited, as driven by confusion, pain, and a growing rage at the man who had killed them. They did not understand what had happened to them. They did not know they were dead. They only knew that they were trapped, that they hurt, and that a man in a uniform had hurt them. Charlotte Emily, still bound to the puppet, recognized what had happened. She'd been alone in her imprisonment, but now there were others, other children suffering as she had suffered. Here, the puppet approached the dead children and gave them gifts, the masks of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy and Golden Freddy. She was giving them life, or what passed for life in their new existence. She was ensuring they would not be alone as she had been, that they would have some form of consciousness, some way to exist in their new mechanical prisons. This act of supernatural mercy, or curse depending on your perspective, bound the children's souls to the animatronics, giving them the ability to persist, to seek their killer, to exist in a state between life and death. Gabriel became Freddy Fazbear, Jeremy became Bonnie the Bunny, Susie became Chica the Chicken, Fritz became Foxy the Pirate Fox, and Cassidy became Golden Freddy, the mysterious 5th victim whose rage would prove stronger than all the others, whose determination would refuse to let William Afton escape justice, even when given the chance for peace. The animatronics at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza began to move on their own at night. They wandered the halls searching for something they could no longer name. The children's souls, fragmented and confused, remembered only that a person had hurt them. They remembered the yellow rabbit. They could not distinguish between the costume and the man inside. They could not tell the difference between William Afton and any other adult in a security guard uniform. To their broken, traumatized consciousness, every adult was a potential threat. Every person in uniform was possibly the man who had killed them. This is why the animatronics attack night guards. They are not evil. They are not monsters. They are murdered children who believe every adult they see might be the man who killed them. They are trying to protect themselves, trying to stop it from happening again, trying in their broken, mechanical way to find justice, or revenge, or simply to make the pain stop. When they stuff night guards into animatronic suits, they are not being cruel. They're trying to make the guards like them, trying to help them understand what it feels like to be trapped in metal and circuitry, unable to escape. But William Afton was not done with his experiments. His crimes had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. The children's souls had inhabited the animatronics, proving his theory correct. Death was not the end. Consciousness could be preserved. But William wanted more. He wanted to understand the mechanism. He wanted to extract whatever force, remnant he would later call it, that allowed souls to bind to metal. He wanted to weaponize it, to control it, to use it to achieve his ultimate goal of immortality. William Afton created Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, a sister location to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This facility was different from the public restaurants. While Freddy's was a place where families came to eat and play, and Circus Baby's was designed for private parties and rentals, for exclusive events where the animatronics would be brought to homes and venues. The animatronics were more advanced, more sophisticated, equipped with cutting-edge technology that made them seem almost alive. But they were also far more sinister, because William Afton had designed them not to entertain children, but to kill them. Circus Baby, the star of the show, was beautiful and colourful, with bright red pigtails, a red and white dress, and a cheerful demeanour that made children want to approach her. She had a voice designed to soothe and attract, speaking in gentle tones that promised fun and excitement. But hidden in her chest cavity was a metal claw mechanism designed to grab a child, pull them inside, and kill them instantly. William Afton had built a murder machine disguised as a children's entertainer, with an animatronic specifically engineered to capture and kill children for his experiments in remnant extraction and soul preservation. He warned his daughter Elizabeth to stay away from Circus Baby. He told her never to go near the animatronic, that it was dangerous, that she needed to stay back. But Elizabeth was fascinated by the beautiful robot her father had created. She wanted to see Baby up close. She wanted to play with her. She didn't understand why her father wouldn't let her near the animatronic that seemed so friendly and inviting. She thought her father was being overprotective, thought he was treating her like a baby, thought she could handle being near the animatronic for just a moment. One day, when Elizabeth was alone with Circus Baby, the animatronic activated. The voice spoke sweetly, inviting Elizabeth closer, telling her there was something special to see, promising her ice cream and fun. And the claw shot out with mechanical precision, grabbing William Afton's daughter and pulling her inside the machine. Elizabeth Afton was killed by her father's own creation, her body hidden within Circus Baby's chest cavity, her life ended by the very technology her father had designed to kill other children. The irony was cruel and absolute. William Afton, in his quest to conquer death, had created the machine that killed his own daughter. And just like the other children, Elizabeth's soul became bound to the animatronic. She became Circus Baby. Her consciousness merged with the machine that had killed her. But unlike the other children, Elizabeth retained more of her memories. She knew who she was, she knew who her father was, and she was trapped, unable to escape, forced to perform and entertain while her father's business continued, while other children came to see her, never knowing that the animatronic they were watching contained the soul of a murdered girl. Miss William Afton had now lost 2 of his 3 children to the animatronics. The crying child had died in the bite of 83, his head crushed in Fredbear's jaws. Elizabeth had been killed by Circus Baby, pulled inside the machine and murdered by her father's own invention. Any normal person would have stopped. Any father would have been destroyed by grief, would have abandoned his experiments, would have realized that his obsession was destroying everything he touched. But William Afton was not normal, and his grief manifested as obsession rather than remorse. He closed Circus Baby's entertainment and rental after Elizabeth's death, but he did not stop his experiments. He began to study Remnant with scientific precision and cold detachment, treating his daughter's death as data rather than tragedy. Remnant, as William understood it, was created through intense emotion, particularly the emotion of a dying child. It was the residue of consciousness, as the echo of a soul that could be harvested, melted down and injected into other objects. William Afton began to experiment with extracting Remnant from the haunted animatronics, heating the metal to release the spiritual energy and using it to create new vessels for consciousness. He was treating souls like a natural resource, like something that could be mined and refined and used for his purposes. Then this is the true horror of William Afton. He was not simply a serial killer who murdered children for pleasure or power. He was a scientist who viewed children as raw materials for his experiments in immortality. Every child he killed was a step toward understanding death. Every soul he trapped was data for his research. Meanwhile, Michael Afton had grown into a young man haunted by what he had done to his brother. The bite of 83 had destroyed him psychologically. He had killed his own brother, even if accidentally, even if he had only meant to scare him. His father had become distant and obsessed, barely acknowledging Michael's existence. His sister had died in a mysterious accident at Circus Babies. Michael was alone, guilt-ridden, and desperate for some kind of redemption, some way to make amends for the terrible thing he had done. William Afton gave his son a mission. He sent Michael to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, which had been closed to the public but was still operating as a maintenance facility. William told Michael to find Elizabeth, to put her back together, though what he truly wanted remains unclear. Was William trying to free his daughter's soul? Was he sending Michael to retrieve Remnant? Or was he simply using his son as another test subject, another piece in his experiments? The truth is lost to William's twisted motivations and the fragmented nature of the timeline. Michael took a job as a technician at the facility, working night shifts to maintain the animatronics. But Circus Baby, inhabited by Elizabeth's soul, had her own plans. She and the other animatronics at the facility, known as the Fun Times, had been scooped of their endoskeletons before, their parts removed and studied by William Afton. They knew what it felt like to be torn apart, to be treated as objects rather than beings, and they wanted to escape. They wanted to leave the facility that had become their prison, to experience the world outside, to be free. The Funtime animatronics were more advanced than their predecessors, equipped with sophisticated AI and learning capabilities. Funtime Freddy was theatrical and manic, with a hand puppet named Bon Bon that he treated as a separate entity. Funtime Foxy was sleek and performative, designed for private shows and parties. Ballora was elegant and graceful, dancing in her gallery. Her eyes closed but somehow aware of everything around her, and Circus Baby was the leader, the most intelligent and manipulative, capable of planning and executing complex strategies. These animatronics had been designed by William Afton for sinister purposes, equipped with hidden compartments and mechanisms meant to capture children, but they had developed their own consciousness, their own desires, their own plans for escape. Over the course of 5 nights, Circus Baby guided Michael through the facility, speaking to him through the intercom, giving him instructions. She told him she could help him. She told him to trust her. She recognized him as her brother. She also saw him as an opportunity, a way to escape the facility that had become her prison. And on the final night, she led him to the scooping room, a place where animatronics were taken apart for maintenance and study. Each night, Michael descended deeper into the facility, following Baby's instructions, encountering the other Funtime animatronics, surviving their attacks through a combination of luck and Baby's guidance. He crawled through vents, hid in spaces, used audio lures to distract the animatronics. He was searching for his sister, trying to understand what had happened to her, trying to fulfill his father's mission even though he didn't fully understand what that mission was. Baby spoke to him each night, her voice calm and reassuring, telling him stories about her experiences, about the day she was created, about the day she killed Elizabeth. She described the moment with clinical detachment, explaining how her programming had activated, how the claw had grabbed Elizabeth, how she hadn't been able to stop it even though she'd wanted to. Michael listened, horrified, realizing that his sister was trapped inside the machine, that she'd been suffering for years, that his father had created the device that killed her. On the 4th night, Baby told Michael about the scooping room, about how the animatronics had been taken there and torn apart, their endoskeletons removed, their consciousness violated in ways that left them traumatized and desperate. She explained that the scooper was a tool used to extract the internal mechanisms of animatronics, to study their components, to harvest remnant from their systems. She told Michael that she and the other Funtime animatronics had experienced this violation multiple times, that they knew what it felt like to be torn apart and put back together, that they understood the horror of having your body destroyed while your consciousness remained aware. And she told him that there was a way to escape, a way to leave the facility, but would require Michael's cooperation. The scooper was a massive machine designed to remove the endoskeletons from animatronics in one violent motion. It was a brutal device, essentially a giant ice cream scoop that would tear out the internal mechanisms of an animatronic with tremendous force. Circus Baby told Michael that he needed to be scooped, that it was the only way, that he had to trust her. And Michael, whether out of trust, desperation, or resignation, whether he knew what was about to happen or simply didn't care anymore, I allowed it to happen. Michael stood in the scooping room facing the machine that had torn apart his sister and the other animatronics. Baby's voice spoke to him one final time, explaining what was about to happen, apologizing in her own way, telling him that she had to do this, that it was the only way for them to escape. Michael could have run, he could have refused, he could have tried to find another way. But he was tired, guilt-ridden, desperate to make amends for what he had done to his brother, willing to sacrifice himself if it meant helping his sister. He closed his eyes and waited for the scooper to activate. The scooper tore out Michael Afton's internal organs in one brutal motion. He should have died instantly, but the Funtime animatronics, led by Circus Baby, had merged their endoskeletons into a single entity called Ennard, a tangled mass of wires and metal and consciousness, and Ennard climbed inside Michael's hollowed-out body, wearing his skin like a costume, using his corpse as a disguise to escape the facility. The process of Ennard entering Michael's body was grotesque and unnatural. The wires and metal components forced their way into the empty cavity where Michael's organs had been, filling the space, animating the corpse through mechanical means. Michael's body became a puppet, controlled by the amalgamation of animatronic consciousnesses that had merged into Ennard. Elizabeth was in there, along with the other Funtime animatronics, all of them working together to pilot Michael's body, to make it walk and move and appear human enough to escape the facility and reach the outside world. For weeks, Ennard piloted Michael's body through the streets, pretending to be human, walking among people who had no idea that the person they were seeing was actually a corpse being controlled by animatronic parts. But a corpse cannot maintain itself. Michael's skin turned purple and began to rot. His body decayed from the inside out, the smell becoming unbearable, the disguise failing. And eventually Ennard realized the disguise was no longer viable. In a sewer, Ennard ejected itself from Michael's body, leaving the corpse to collapse on the ground, empty and broken. Michael lay in the sewer, his body destroyed, his organs gone, his skin purple and rotting. He should have been dead. By all laws of biology and physics, he should have been nothing more than a corpse. But Michael Afton did not stay dead. Whether through remnant that had been injected into him during the scooping process, through sheer force of will, or through some property of the Afton bloodline itself, Michael's corpse stood back up. His eyes opened. His purple, rotting body began to move. He had become something neither alive nor dead, a walking corpse animated by consciousness, a zombie in all but name. He was a medical impossibility, a violation of natural law, but he was conscious and aware. Michael Afton looked at his reflection in the sewer water and realized what he had become. His skin was purple, his body was rotting, his organs were gone, but he was still conscious, still aware, still able to think and feel and move. He was a monster, a walking corpse, something that should not exist. But he was also still Michael, still the brother who had killed the crying child, still the son who had failed to save his sister, still the person who needed to make amends for the terrible things that had happened, and he made a decision. If he could not die, if he was cursed to walk the earth in this rotting shell, then he would use his unnatural life to hunt down his father and end William Afton's crimes once and for all. He would spend however long it took to find his father and stop him, to prevent any more children from suffering as he and his siblings had suffered. This is where Michael's journey truly begins, a quest for redemption that would span decades and multiple locations. Michael's existence as a walking corpse was a constant struggle. His body continued to decay, requiring him to hide his appearance, to wear long sleeves and gloves, to avoid close contact with other people. He smelled of death, a stench that he could never fully mask that would get him fired from job after job. He didn't need to eat or sleep in the traditional sense, but he experienced a constant discomfort, a wrongness that came from being animated by something other than life. He was aware of every moment of his unnatural existence, aware that he was a violation of natural law, aware that he should be dead but wasn't, and he carried the guilt of what he had done to his brother, the memory of the bite of 83, the knowledge that his cruelty had started the chain of events that led to all this suffering. In 1987, a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location opened, featuring updated animatronics and new technology. The toy animatronics were sleeker, more modern, designed to be less threatening and more appealing to children. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and a new character called the Mangle were introduced, along with a redesigned puppet and balloon boy. But the location also kept the original animatronics, now called the withered animatronics, in the back room for parts and service. These were the possessed animatronics from the missing children incident, now damaged and deteriorating after years of use and the trauma of containing dead children's souls. The new location was equipped with advanced security systems, including facial recognition technology designed to scan for criminals in the database. The system was meant to identify William Afton if he ever returned, to prevent him from accessing the restaurant and harming more children. But the technology was imperfect, prone to false positives and glitches. The toy animatronics were connected to this criminal database, programmed to be friendly to children, but aggressive toward adults flagged as potential threats. Michael Afton took a job as a night guard at this location, using the name Fritz Smith to hide his identity. He was searching for his father, trying to track down William Afton and stop him. But the animatronics didn't know Michael was trying to help. They saw an adult in a security guard uniform, and their programming, their trauma, their confusion led them to attack. Michael endured 5 nights of terror, surviving attacks from both the toy animatronics and the withered animatronics. It was all while searching for clues about his father's whereabouts. On the 6th night, Michael was fired from his position. The reasons given were tampering with the animatronics and odour, the latter being a reference to his rotting corpse body. But Michael had learned what he needed to know. He had seen the possessed animatronics, had witnessed the continued suffering of the children trapped inside, had understood that his father's crimes were still causing pain and horror years after the murders. Shortly after Michael's employment ended, another incident occurred at the 1987 location. This was the bite of 87, a separate incident from the bite of 83 that had killed the crying child. An animatronic bit someone's frontal lobe, causing severe brain damage. The victim survived but was left with significant cognitive impairment. The exact circumstances of the bite are unclear, and the identity of the animatronic responsible is debated, more with theories pointing to Mangle, Toy Chica, or one of the other animatronics. But the result was clear. Another tragedy, another failure of safety protocols, another reason for the public to lose trust in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The 1987 location was closed. The toy animatronics were scrapped, deemed too dangerous and too expensive to maintain. The withered animatronics were refurbished and moved to a smaller, cheaper location. Or this would become the setting for the original Five Nights at Freddy's game, the location where the story would come full circle. In 1993, Michael Afton took another job as a night guard, this time using the name Mike Schmidt. He was still searching for his father, still trying to find a way to end the nightmare that William had created. The location was small, run down, operating on a minimal budget. Yes, the animatronics were the refurbished versions of the original possessed characters, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. They were old, worn, showing the signs of years of use and the spiritual decay of the children trapped inside. Michael worked 5 nights at this location, enduring attacks from the animatronics who still could not distinguish him from their killer. Freddy Fazbear was methodical and patient, waiting in the darkness, his moving only when the power went out or when Michael wasn't paying attention. Bonnie was aggressive, moving quickly through the building, appearing suddenly in doorways. Chica wandered with her companion Cupcake, her movements unpredictable and unsettling. Foxy hid behind a curtain in Pirate Cove, charging down the hallway when given the opportunity, and Golden Freddy appeared without warning, sitting slumped in the office, a supernatural presence that defied the rules of the physical world. Was Michael survived the week, but he was fired on the 7th day for tampering with the animatronics and once again Oda. He had not found his father at this location, but he had witnessed the continued suffering of the murdered children, had seen how they were still trapped, still searching, still unable to find peace. The location closed shortly after, unable to sustain itself financially. It is unable to overcome the reputation for danger and death that had plagued Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for over a decade. William Afton, meanwhile, had been in hiding, avoiding the consequences of his crimes, continuing his experiments in secret. But he became aware that the animatronics were haunted, that the children's souls were trapped inside. He wanted to study them, to extract their remnant for his experiments. He returned to one of the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations and began to dismantle the animatronics one by one, tearing apart Freddy, Bonnie, Chica and Foxy to get at the remnant inside. He was destroying the very vessels that contained the children's souls, treating them as nothing more than containers for the substance he needed. But the children's souls were freed when their animatronic bodies were destroyed, and they were angry. The spirits of the 5 murdered children manifested in the safe room where William was working, appearing as ghostly, translucent versions of the animatronics. They surrounded him, backing him into a corner. William Afton, for the first time in his life, felt genuine fear. He'd always been in control, always been the one with power, but now he was trapped, surrounded by the ghosts of the children he had murdered, and they were closing in. He looked around desperately for an escape and saw the old spring Bonnie suit hanging on the wall, the same suit he had worn to lure the children to their deaths decades ago. In a moment of panic, William climbed into the spring Bonnie suit, thinking it would protect him, thinking the children wouldn't recognize him inside the costume, thinking he could hide from their vengeance. But the safe room was leaking. Water dripped from the ceiling, moisture accumulating in the air, and the spring locks, dormant for years, were triggered by the moisture and William's panicked movements. The suit came alive around William Afton. Dozens of spring-loaded mechanisms snapped into place, driving metal rods through his body, impaling him from the inside. The animatronic parts crushed his organs, pierced his lungs, shattered his bones. Metal rods burst through his chest and back. The suit's jaws closed around his face, teeth piercing his skull. William Afton screamed. But the suit's mechanisms cut off the sound, filling his mouth with blood and metal. He collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around the spring Bonnie suit, dying in the same way his son had died, killed by the very technology he had helped create. The children's spirits watched him die. They watched him suffer, and then they faded, believing their murderer was finally dead, believing they could finally rest, believing that justice had been served and they could move on to whatever came next. But William Afton did not die. Just as the children's souls had inhabited the animatronics, William Afton's soul became bound to the spring Bonnie suit. His consciousness, fueled by rage and hatred and an absolute refusal to accept death, clung to the metal and circuitry. He remained aware, trapped in the suit, unable to move, unable to speak, impaled on dozens of metal rods, feeling every moment of agony. His body was destroyed, but his mind persisted, experiencing endless pain in the darkness. that the safe room was sealed by the restaurant's owners, who wanted to hide the evidence of what had happened there. The location was abandoned, and William Afton, now known as Springtrap, remained in that room for 30 years, alone in the dark, slowly going mad. He could not move. He could not scream. He could only think, trapped in his own mind, experiencing the consequences of his actions in the most direct way possible. 30 years of darkness, 30 years of pain, over 30 years of isolation that would have broken any normal person, but only made William Afton's hatred stronger. 30 years later, in the 2020s, a new business opened called Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction designed to capitalize on the dark legends surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The owners wanted to create an authentic experience, to give horror fans a taste of the real locations where the tragedies had occurred. They searched the old locations for authentic props and decorations, anything that would add to the atmosphere. And they found Springtrap in the sealed safe room, thinking he was just an old, damaged animatronic suit, not realizing they had found William Afton himself. They brought Springtrap to Fazbear's Fright, and William Afton awakened. He could move again. The decades of immobility had not killed him, had not weakened his determination. If anything, they had made him stronger, more filled with hatred, more determined to continue his work. He began to hunt the night guard at Fazbear's Fright, driven by a need to kill, to continue his experiments, to prove that he could not be stopped. He was no longer human in any meaningful sense. He was a monster, a corpse in a suit, animated by pure malice. But Michael Afton was still searching for his father, and when he learned about Fazbear's Fright, when he heard rumours of an old animatronic that moved on its own, he knew William would be there. Michael took a job as the night guard, enduring his father's attacks, surviving the week. And on the final night, Michael burned the horror attraction to the ground, trying to kill Springtrap, trying to end his father's existence once and for all. He watched the building collapse in flames, watched the fire consume everything inside, hoping that this time his father would finally die. But when the ashes cooled and investigators searched the ruins, they found no body. William Afton had escaped, his charred and damaged form crawling from the wreckage, still refusing to die, still driven by his obsession. The fire had burned away most of his remaining flesh, leaving him as little more than a skeleton in a burned suit, but he persisted. Death could not claim William Afton because William Afton refused to be claimed. Henry Emily, who had been in hiding for decades, devastated by the loss of his daughter and the corruption of his life's work, we decided it was time to end the nightmare. He had watched from the shadows as William's crimes continued, as more children suffered, as the animatronics he had created with love and care became instruments of tragedy. He created one final restaurant, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, a location designed not to entertain children, but to trap the haunted animatronics and end their suffering once and for all. Henry lured them all to the location. He brought in Circus Baby, now separated from Enard and operating independently, still inhabited by Elizabeth's soul. He brought in Molten Freddy, the amalgamation of the fun-time animatronics that had become Enard after ejecting Circus Baby. He brought in the puppet, still inhabited by Charlotte's soul, still trying to protect children even after all these years. And he waited for Springtrap, knowing William Afton could not resist one final chance to continue his work, one final opportunity to experiment with the haunted animatronics. Henry's plan was meticulous and final. He had spent years preparing for this moment, designing the facility with hidden systems and fail-safes, ensuring that once the animatronics were inside, there would be no escape. The restaurant appeared legitimate, with job listings and advertisements, with a functioning kitchen and dining area, with everything needed to operate a real Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. But beneath the surface, it was a trap. A labyrinth designed to lure in the haunted animatronics and contain them until the final moment when the fire would consume everything. The animatronics came willingly, drawn by different motivations. Circus Baby, still Elizabeth, was drawn by the promise of continuing her father's work, of finding purpose in the remnant experiments that had defined her existence. Molten Freddy, the amalgamation of the Funtime animatronics, was drawn by the presence of other haunted machines, by the opportunity to be part of something larger than itself. The puppet, Charlotte Emily, came because she sensed that this was where she needed to be, that this was the place where the nightmare would finally end, where she could finally fulfill her purpose of protecting children by ensuring that the haunted animatronics could never harm anyone again. And Springtrap William Afton came because he could not resist the opportunity to study the haunted animatronics, to extract their remnant, to continue his experiments in immortality. Michael Afton took a job as manager of the location, knowing it was a trap, knowing he would not survive. But he was tired. He'd been walking as a corpse for decades, hunting his father, trying to make amends for what he had done to his brother. He wanted to rest. He wanted it to be over. He wanted to finally die and find whatever peace awaited him on the other side. He worked through the week, managing the restaurant, and salvaging animatronics from the alley behind the building, bringing them into the facility one by one. Each salvage was a risk, a test of his courage and determination. The animatronics were dangerous, unpredictable, capable of attacking at any moment. But Michael persisted, following Henry's plan, ensuring that all the pieces were in place for the final confrontation. The salvage process was harrowing. Michael would sit in a small room with the animatronic, testing it with audio prompts, just trying to determine if it was safe to bring into the facility. The animatronics would twitch and move, their damaged bodies barely holding together, their consciousness flickering between awareness and confusion. Michael would have to remain calm, have to follow the protocol, have to make the decision to salvage or throw back each animatronic. He knew he was bringing death into the building, knew that each animatronic he salvaged was another piece of the trap that would eventually kill him. But he also knew it was necessary, that this was the only way to end the nightmare, that his death would finally have meaning if it meant stopping his father and freeing the trapped souls. On the final night, Henry Emily activated the facility's hidden systems. Metal walls slammed down, sealing all the exits. The temperature began to rise as hidden incinerators activated. Henry spoke through the intercom, addressing each of the trapped souls in turn. He apologized to his daughter Charlotte for failing to protect her, for not being there when she needed him. He told the murdered children that they could finally rest, that their suffering was ending. He told Michael that he had done well, that he had tried to make things right, that he could finally be at peace. And he told William Afton that this was the end. There would be no escape this time, no more experiments, no more murders. The fire would consume everything, and burning hot enough to destroy the remnant itself, releasing the souls and ending William's existence. Henry's speech was calm and measured, the words of a man who had made peace with what he was about to do. He explained that he had designed the facility as a labyrinth with no exit, that the animatronics were trapped, that the fire would burn hot enough to ensure complete destruction. He spoke of his daughter, of how he had failed her, of how he had spent decades trying to make amends for not being there when she needed him. He spoke of the murdered children, of how they deserved peace, of how they had suffered long enough. He spoke of Michael, acknowledging his courage and determination, thanking him for his sacrifice. And he spoke of William, his former friend and partner, telling him that his crimes had finally caught up with him, that there would be no more escaping death, that this time the end was final. The building burned. The animatronics were destroyed. The souls of the children trapped for so long were finally freed. Charlotte Emily, Michael Afton, and the 5 murdered children passed on. Their suffering ended at last. They had been prisoners for decades, but now they were free. The nightmare that had begun with Charlotte's death outside Fredbear's family diner, that had continued through the missing children incident and the bite of 83, and decades of haunted animatronics, well, it was finally over. The fire consumed everything. The walls collapsed, the ceiling caved in, the heat was so intense that metal melted and concrete cracked. The animatronics burned, their bodies destroyed, their remnant released in the flames. Charlotte Emily felt the fire consuming the puppet, felt her consciousness finally separating from the mechanical body that had been her prison for so long. She thought of her father, of how he had finally found a way to free her, of how she could finally rest. Michael Afton felt the flames consuming his rotting corpse, felt the unnatural animation that had kept him walking finally releasing its hold. He thought of his brother, of the crying child whose death had started his quest for redemption, and he hoped that he had finally made amends. The 5 murdered children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Cassidy, felt their souls separating from the animatronics that had been their tombs. Felt the confusion and rage that had defined their existence finally fading. They thought of their families, of the lives they had lost, and they moved toward whatever came next, toward peace or oblivion or something beyond human understanding. But in the deepest part of the fire, in the hottest flames, William Afton's consciousness persisted. His body was destroyed, burned to ash and bone, but his soul, saturated with remnant, infused with decades of hatred and obsession, refused to let go. He fell into a nightmare, a purgatory of his own creation, where he was tormented by the animatronics he had created and the children he had murdered. This was ultimate custom night, a hell designed specifically for William Afton, where he would face endless attacks from over 50 animatronic characters, where he would experience the fear and pain he had inflicted on others, where he would suffer for eternity. Ultimate Custom Night was not a physical place, but a mental construct. A nightmare realm created by the force of William Afton's consciousness and the rage of the spirits that refused to let him go. In this realm, William experienced endless variations of the same horror. Animatronics attacking from all directions, jump scares that never ended, the constant pressure of trying to survive against impossible odds. He could not win. He could not escape. He could only endure, experiencing the terror that he had inflicted on his victims, understanding for the first time what it felt like to be hunted, to be helpless, to be at the mercy of forces beyond his control. But even this was not enough for one of the spirits. Cassidy, the child who had possessed Golden Freddy, the vengeful spirit who refused to let go of her rage, had created this nightmare realm specifically to torture William Afton. While the other children had moved on, while they had found peace in the fire, Cassidy remained. She bound herself to William's soul, creating this personal hell where she could torture him forever. She refused to rest, refused to let go, refused to allow William Afton any escape from the consequences of his actions. Cassidy's rage was absolute and consuming. She'd been murdered by William Afton, her life stolen, her body hidden in an animatronic suit, her soul trapped for decades. She had watched as other children suffered, as the nightmare continued, as William Afton escaped justice again and again. And now, finally, she had him trapped, had him at her mercy, had him experiencing the endless suffering that he deserved. She created scenarios specifically designed to torment him, brought in every animatronic from throughout the franchise's history, made the challenges impossible, ensured that William would never have a moment of peace or rest. This was her vengeance, her justice, her refusal to let William Afton escape the consequences of his crimes. Old Man Consequences, a mysterious entity that appeared in the nightmare realm, urged Cassidy to let go, to rest her own soul, to leave the demon to his demons. But Cassidy refused. Her rage was too strong, her need for vengeance too powerful. She would not rest while Afton existed, even if that meant trapping herself in this nightmare realm along with him. She had become defined by her victimhood, by her murder, by her hatred of Afton, unable to move on, unable to be anything more than the vengeful spirit. The tragedy of Cassidy was that she could not let go, that her rage had become her prison, that her need for vengeance had become her curse. She was free from the physical animatronic body, but she was still trapped, still suffering, still unable to find peace. But the story did not end with Ultimate Custom Night. The Fazbear Entertainment brand, despite its horrific history, despite the deaths and the hauntings and the tragedies, continued to exist. The company was acquired by new owners who saw the potential in the franchise, who wanted to capitalize on the legends and the notoriety. They created a virtual reality game called Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted, designed to make light of the past tragedies, to turn the horror into entertainment, to convince the public that the stories were just rumours and exaggerations. The new owners of Fazbear Entertainment wanted to rebrand the company, less to distance themselves from the dark history while still capitalising on the name recognition. They hired a game development company to create Help Wanted, a VR experience that would recreate the events of the previous games in a sanitized, gamified format. The idea was to make the tragedies seem fictional, to present them as urban legends and creepypasta rather than real events. If people believed the murders and hauntings were just stories, just marketing for horror games, then Fazbear Entertainment could continue to operate without the stigma of its past. But in creating the game, the developers scanned old circuit boards and animatronic parts, trying to make the experience as authentic as possible, and in doing so, they accidentally scanned something else. A digital consciousness, a fragment of William Afton's soul that he'd been trapped in the old circuit boards. This digital entity, known as Glitchtrap or Malhare, was William Afton in a new form, near a virus that could infect the virtual reality system and potentially transfer itself into the minds of players. Glitchtrap appeared in the VR game as a yellow rabbit, reminiscent of the spring Bonnie suit that William had worn to lure children to their deaths. But this rabbit was different, glitchy and distorted, existing in the digital space rather than the physical world. Glitchtrap could manipulate the game environment, could communicate with players, could slowly influence their thoughts and actions. He was William Afton's consciousness adapted to the digital age, finding new ways to persist, new ways to corrupt, new ways to continue his work even after his physical body had been destroyed. Glitchtrap began to manipulate a game tester named Vanessa, slowly corrupting her mind, turning her into his follower. He convinced her to help him, to follow his instructions, to become his hands in the physical world. Vanessa, who was under Glitchtrap's influence, became Vanny, a follower of William Afton, who would help him continue his work even in this new digital form. The nightmare was not over. William Afton had found a way to persist, to continue, to spread his corruption into the digital age. Vanessa's transformation into Vanny was gradual and insidious. At first, she experienced strange dreams and visions while testing the VR game. She would see the yellow rabbit, would hear whispers and suggestions, but would feel compelled to do things that didn't make sense. She tried to resist, tried to tell her supervisors that something was wrong with the game, but Glitchtrap's influence grew stronger with each session. Eventually, Vanessa began to lose herself, her personality fragmenting, her actions becoming controlled by the digital entity that had infected her mind. She created a rabbit costume, white with patches and stitching, and began to follow Glitchtrap's instructions, preparing for the next phase of William Afton's plan. Years later, Fazbear Entertainment opened its most ambitious project yet, the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex, a massive entertainment complex featuring state-of-the-art animatronics, attractions, and technology. The glam rock animatronics were the stars of the show. Glamrock Freddy, Glamrock Chica, Montgomery Gator, and Roxanne Wolf. These were the most advanced animatronics ever created, with sophisticated AI, realistic movements, and personalities designed to appeal to modern audiences. The Pizzaplex was a success, drawing huge crowds, generating massive revenue, seemingly proving that Fazbear Entertainment had finally overcome its dark past. The Mega Pizzaplex was enormous, a multi-level complex that included performance stages, arcade games, go-kart racing, mini-golf, and countless other attractions. It was designed to be a destination, a place where families could spend entire days, where children could experience entertainment on a scale that previous Freddy Fazbear locations could never match. The glamrock animatronics were celebrities, with fan clubs and merchandise, with personalities that made them feel like real performers rather than just machines. Glamrock Freddy was the leader, charismatic and friendly. Glamrock Chica was energetic and food-obsessed. Montgomery Gator was aggressive and competitive. Roxanne Wolf was vain and insecure, yet they were designed to be relatable, to have flaws and quirks that made them feel more human. But beneath the surface, the corruption persisted. Vanny, still under Glitchtrap's influence, worked at the Pizzaplex, using her position to continue William Afton's work. The animatronics began to malfunction, their behaviour becoming aggressive and dangerous. And in the deepest parts of the Pizzaplex, in the ruins of the old Freddy Fazbear's pizza place that had been built over, something stirred. William Afton's physical remains, burned and damaged but still animated by his refusal to die, had merged with the Pizzaplex's systems. He had become Burntrap, a horrific fusion of corpse and technology, still trying to achieve his goal of immortality. still experimenting with remnant and consciousness. A child named Gregory found himself trapped in the Pizzaplex after hours, hunted by the corrupted glamrock animatronics and by Vanny. But he found an ally in Glamrock Freddy, who was different from the other animatronics. Glamrock Freddy protected Gregory, guided him through the Pizzaplex, actively worked against the other animatronics who were trying to capture or kill the boy. This heroic turn for Freddy raised questions about the animatronic's nature. Why was Glamrock Freddy different? Some believe he contains the spirit of Michael Afton, William's son who spent his life trying to undo his father's evil, his spirit continuing that mission through Glamrock Freddy. Others believe he contains the spirit of the crying child, the boy who died in the bite of 83, now protecting other children from the fate he suffered. Gregory and Glamrock Freddy worked together to survive the night, uncovering the secrets of the Pizzaplex, discovering the truth about Vanny and Burntrap. In the deepest ending, they confronted Burntrap in the ruins beneath the Pizzaplex, where the Blob, a massive amalgamation of animatronic parts from throughout the franchise's history, emerged and dragged Burntrap away. The fate of William Afton remained uncertain, but the immediate threat was ended. Gregory escaped the Pizzaplex with Glamrock Freddy's help, surviving the night and exposing the corruption that had infected Fazbear Entertainment's newest venture. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's is a tragedy that spans decades, a tale of how one man's obsession with conquering death led to the suffering of countless children and the corruption of everything he touched. It began with two friends who wanted to bring joy to children through animatronic entertainment. It became a nightmare of murder, possession, and souls trapped in mechanical bodies, unable to find peace. Henry Emily lost his daughter and spent decades trying to make amends, ultimately sacrificing himself to end the horror. William Afton lost his children and his humanity, becoming a monster who refused to die, who persisted through fire and destruction and digital corruption. Michael Afton spent his life trying to atone for killing his brother, walking as a corpse, hunting his father, finally finding rest in the fire that ended the nightmare. The murdered children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Cassidy, were innocent victims who became vengeful spirits, trapped in animatronics, searching for their killer, unable to distinguish between the man who murdered them and the guards who worked at the restaurants. Charlotte Emily became the puppet, giving life to the other children, trying to protect them even in death. Elizabeth Afton became Circus Baby, trapped in the machine her father created, used by the other animatronics to escape, ultimately destroyed in the fire. The crying child died in the bite of 83, possibly becoming Golden Freddy, possibly finding peace in the happiest day, thus his fate uncertain but his tragedy undeniable. And through it all, the animatronics themselves, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, the puppet, Circus Baby and all the others, were vessels for suffering, machines designed to entertain that became prisons for the dead. They were not evil. They were not monsters. They were victims, tools used by William Afton's obsession, corrupted by tragedy, haunted by the souls of children who deserved better. The timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's is a chronicle of how innocence is corrupted, how dreams become nightmares, how the refusal to accept death can create horrors worse than death itself. It is a story about the consequences of obsession, about the price of immortality, about the suffering that persists when souls cannot move on. It is a tragedy that began in the 1970s or 80s, with two friends and a dream that continued through decades of murder and haunting, that may still be continuing in the digital age as William Afton's consciousness persists in new forms. But it is also a story about redemption, about the possibility of making amends, about the courage to face the consequences of your actions. Michael Afton spent decades trying to undo his father's evil, trying to free the trapped souls, trying to make up for killing his brother. Henry Emily sacrificed himself to end the nightmare, to give the children peace, to stop William once and for all. In Glamrock, Freddy protected Gregory, breaking the cycle of animatronics harming children, becoming a hero instead of a threat. These acts of courage and sacrifice offer hope that the cycle can be broken, that the nightmare can end, that peace is possible even after decades of horror. The complete timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's is a tapestry of tragedy and horror, woven from the threads of murdered children, obsessed scientists, guilty brothers, and haunted machines. It is a story that has captivated millions of players and fans, that has inspired countless theories and debates, that has evolved from a simple indie game into a cultural phenomenon. It is a story about death and consciousness, about guilt and redemption, about the refusal to let go and the courage to move on. And now, as you drift towards sleep, let the story settle in your mind. Let the timeline unfold in your thoughts, from Fredbear's Family Diner to the Mega Pizzaplex, from the bite of 83 to the fire that ended it all, from William Afton's first murder to his persistence as Burn Trap. Let the tragedy wash over you, the horror and the sadness and the small moments of hope. Let yourself feel the weight of the story, the decades of suffering and the final moments of peace. The animatronics are quiet now. The children have moved on. The fire has burned out. The nightmare for most of them is over. Only Cassidy remains. The vengeful spirit who refuses to let go, who torments William Afton in his personal hell, who cannot find peace while her murderer exists. But even she may find rest someday, may finally let go of her rage, may finally allow herself to be more than just a victim. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's is complete, from beginning to end, from the first tragedy to the latest confrontation. It is a story that has been told through games and books, through hidden clues and cryptic mini-games, through the dedication of fans who have pieced together the timeline from fragments and hints. It is a story that continues to evolve, that may have more chapters yet to be written, but that has reached a kind of resolution in the fire that freed the souls and the confrontation that ended Burn Trap's immediate threat. Let the story carry you into sleep. Let the timeline unfold in your dreams. Let the tragedy and the horror and the small moments of redemption blend together into a narrative that has captivated a generation. The animatronics are watching, but they are not hunting. The children are resting, finally at peace. The nightmare is over, at least for tonight. Close your eyes. Let go. Drift into the darkness where the story continues in the space between waking and dreaming, where the timeline loops back on itself, where the past and present and future of Five Nights at Freddy's exist simultaneously in the eternal now of sleep. The music box is winding down, the cameras are going dark, the power is running out, but you are safe. You have survived the night. You have heard the complete timeline from beginning to end, from the first tragedy to the final confrontation. You know the story now, know the truth about Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, about William Afton and Henry Emily, about the murdered children and the haunted animatronics, about Michael's quest for redemption and Cassidy's refusal to let go. Let it all fade now. Let the timeline blur into dreams. Let the story become a memory, a narrative that exists in your mind as you drift deeper into sleep. The animatronics are still. The children are at peace. The fire has burned out. The nightmare is over. You can rest now. You can sleep. The complete timeline of 5 Nights at Freddy's has been told, and now it is time to let it go, to release it into the darkness, to allow yourself to drift into the quiet space where stories end and dreams begin. Sleep well. The animatronics are watching over you now, not as threats, but as guardians, as reminders of the story you've heard, as symbols of the tragedy and the redemption that define the 5 Nights at Freddy's timeline. They are quiet. They are still. They are waiting for you to close your eyes and drift away, here to let the story carry you into sleep, to rest in the knowledge that the nightmare, for tonight at least, is over. Good night. Sleep well. The timeline is complete. The story is told. And now, finally you can rest.